Morning, everybody, and welcome to Broadcast Revolution's latest webinar, our latest event, our monthly event. And on this occasion, we'll be hearing the thoughts of Rob Unsworth, the head of The One Show. We'll get underway with Rob in the next couple of minutes. Rob, if you want to turn on your camera, just to reassure us you're there. There we are. Wonderful. There we are, everyone. Rob is there. We'll be getting underway with Rob in the next couple of minutes or so. We'll just let any latecomers dial in. Sometimes it takes a little while to enter the Zoom room. And just a reminder to everyone watching, if you'd like to ask a question of Rob yourself, you can do. Send that question through to us via our Twitter account. That's at Broadcast Revo, at Broadcast Revo. You can also ask a question or join the chat using the hashtag join the broadcast revolution. So on the Twitter at Broadcast Revo and via hashtag join the broadcast revolution. 4 minutes past 9, so we may as well get underway. Rob, if that's okay with you.
Great. Morning.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for being there for us. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our event this month. We'll be hearing the thoughts of Rob Unsworth, the head of The One Show. As I say, Twitter account at Broadcast Revo. If you want to ask a question of Rob, I'll try and read those out as we go along. You can ask a question, join the chat using the hashtag join the broadcast revolution. Now, everyone who asks a question, by the way, automatically gets entered into a quarterly draw for a free Broadcast for Good campaign. This is where we'll deliver a free campaign to a charity of your choice on your behalf, and this will be drawn towards the end of the month. Rob Unsworth, then, head of The One Show for the last year and a bit or so. Rob, when did you start?
I started 2 weeks before lockdown started, which is either good or bad timing.
I noticed on LinkedIn it was March, and March 2020, and I went, that must have been fun.
It was quite full on because obviously one of the things that I was very keen to do when I started at The One Show, obviously it's always had topical elements, but I wanted to sort of bring that a little bit to the fore and really make it feel as if, all our content was reflecting the national conversation. And it very quickly became clear that at that period, there really was only one national conversation. I remember about day 2, when I was saying to people, we need to do more on this. And, there were some members of the team who said, we've sort of done that now. And me saying, I think we really need to clear the decks a bit. And then we were very quickly establishing, as you'll have done, all of you yourselves, very different working practices. And in my first week, I was taking the decision to sort of, cut back on the number of people involved in producing the daily show. And we were very much, within days, we were at a point beyond which we thought it was impossible to go. We'd sat there and we thought, how many people do we really need to make this operation work in the studio? And we thought, okay, we can't go beyond that. And then, obviously, when the lockdown was announced, we did go beyond that and had to go further still. And as most of you will know, we were, one of very few shows that kept going right throughout the pandemic. We didn't have a day that we were off other than sort of scheduled sort of bank holidays or anything. So that was very interesting. And obviously we had to adapt very quickly and work out different ways of doing things to keep the show on air.
I was at Radio 4 as the pandemic hit. working in your old building, because you're London-based now, but there you were in Media City in Salford before that. I think head of factual at the BBC in Salford was your previous role. Editor of Watchdog in times gone by before that, led the current affairs team in Manchester. What was the transition like for you? You've been based in Salford. You've been, one of the stalwarts of Salford for so long. What was that move back down to London like for you? How did that feel?
Well, the One Show had always been a key part of my role in Salford. My current affairs team had always made the current affairs films for the One Show. So I felt like I had a very good sort of understanding of it. And it was one of those shows as well. Obviously, I'd been aware of it and known it and watched it since it began. And it had always been something that excited me, to have that sort of regular presence in the schedule and such a broad remit that allows you to cover anything. That was a very exciting, opportunity. And I'd loved my role in Salford, but I think it's fair to say that the One Show is the most exciting job that I've had in telly. The range of stuff we do is incredible, and since that moment, just before lockdown began, we've barely sort of drawn breath, really. It's flown by, and there's been such an extraordinary number of things that we've done, and done lots of things with people who've on this call who will have suggested guests and items. So that's why it's really useful to be able to just kind of catch up with people and give a sense of what we're about and what we're after, because I think it's a show that can be misunderstood by lots of people as well, and there's some key principles, I suppose, that I always try and think of and instill in people when we're trying to decide which stories work and which don't. So I'll rattle through some of those as we go along.
Yeah, absolutely. Very keen to know them. I mean, it's a pillar of the schedules. I think that was the BBC press release when you were announced as the new boss. It said pillar of the schedules, the One Show. Now it's been going for what, 13, 14 years?
15.
Something like that? 15 years now.
Yeah.
So is it harder to take on a program that's become that pillar? Or is it easier, actually, in many ways, to actually shape a new program and maybe make a few mistakes at the start, but actually be there right at the start?
That's a really interesting one, and obviously I've been lucky enough to do both in my career. In some ways, inevitably, it's slightly easier to take over something that's already established, because you've been able to sort of form your own opinions and have a look at what works and what you'd sort of tweak, over time. But I think that we did sort of, it was quite interesting because the pandemic wasn't just interesting for us organizationally. It did mean editorially as well. We probably in some ways shifted faster towards what I wanted to do than we might otherwise have done, if you like. And
I was going to ask, what did you want to do? Day one, what was your priority or list of priorities for that program?
Well, for me, I want, and all of these elements with us, and nothing I'm saying is a criticism of anything that had gone before, because, all the teams that had done the One Show in previous years had done an incredible job to get it to, be as established and to have that place in the schedule. So I'm lucky enough to be able to come in and just do, just make tweaks as any new boss of anything will want to do. I wanted it to feel like there was everything on the show that day. If somebody said, "Why are you doing that today?" we'd be able to have a very clear answer, so that it didn't look like it had just been randomly assembled, if you like. There's a plan for what's there. I wanted it to feel, we come in the schedule after an hour of news, so we have to feel topical, but at the same time, we don't want to be giving people just more news. We want to be a sort of transition, if you like, from that sort of very serious part of the schedule to what's coming throughout the rest of the evening on BBC One. So we're a strange hybrid, if you like, of being topical, having entertainment, but also having factual and current affairs elements as well. So it's trying to knit that together so that it feels like it's both relevant and relatable, but and of course interesting to watch, but that it does feel like that it is part of what people are talking about that day, and it doesn't feel like it could have been something that could have gone out at any time over the last 6 months.
What was the sort of audience figure as you started, and has the pandemic affected that significantly, do you think?
We were very lucky to have, if you like, obviously a bigger audience during the pandemic. So, we did get much higher shares throughout lockdown. As the world returned to normal, our figures returned to around normal. Perhaps they're slightly on average higher. So of course some of those newer viewers that came have stuck with us. It's very interesting actually when you look at sort of the comments that we get in every day, which I always do, how many people every day might say, oh, I've never watched this program before. And that's I always find that quite interesting, because obviously we were just saying it's been on the schedule for 15 years. You would think that means that everybody knows what it is, but of course they don't, and you'll always have people watching it for the first time. So if we're deliberately doing something to attract a different age group, which we might at times, then we might then plan the rest of that day's running order accordingly. I'll give you an example. We did a very nice item earlier this year with the band BTS, which a lot of One Show viewers might not have known. But we knew had a very dedicated and enthusiastic fan base, the BTS Army. And on social, they are, huge. So even the first mention that we were doing BTS, had got sort of, tens of thousands of retweets and all of that, and generated quite a buzz. So we knew that we were going to be getting quite an influx of younger people watching it that day. So as we planned the rest of the films, we had a nice film that the actress Danny Harmer, who you may know was Tracy Beaker in the TV series, she'd done a really interesting film about fat shaming and body image, which again, we just thought actually that's going to appeal to lots of the sort of people who were interested in BTS. So it's that kind of, planning and working that through, whilst obviously making sure that for those viewers who wouldn't necessarily have thought BTS, we were able to explain to them who this band were, and package that in a sort of explanatory way, saying this is, you may not have heard of them, but this is the biggest band in the world right now. So I think one of the things that I've really been keen to make sure that our team does all the time is keep in mind that no, other than the Queen, and possibly Elton John, I'd say there's very few people that are famous to everybody. What's really interesting when you're doing a show that caters to lots of different age groups is that, the sort of person that some people will get really excited about, there will be others who are like, who's that? And you'll be amazed at the people who would sometimes say, I don't know who that person is, but others who say, oh, that person's huge. So I'm really, we can't assume knowledge. We can't assume that people, know everything we're talking about. So I'm wanting to step back sometimes and just do a little bit of a sort of, make sure that we're not expecting everybody to automatically understand who somebody is, and introduce all sorts of people. It's always been a key part of our show that we've got those sort of celebrity elements and guests, and obviously we've been really keen to sort of have ones who are of the moment or up and coming, but making sure that doesn't alienate the viewers who've been watching for all of those 15 years. So it's quite a tricky balancing act in that regard. As with every other show, we want to maintain the audience we've got while keeping another audience, coming through. But, I want it to feel like a show that cheers people up. So as I was saying before, we come after news. So we don't want to depress people. And whilst when we were doing all our pandemic related stuff, and so much of our films were rooted in coronavirus, we deliberately didn't talk about death. And that sounds, silly on the one hand, but it was, my feeling was, we're part of that wider schedule in the evening. People have had a lot of that on the news. There were some people we could see from the feedback we were getting every day. There were some people who were saying, well, I've stopped watching the news. I find it too upsetting. But I'm getting a sense of topicality, but more importantly, in many ways, of normality by watching your show. And there were people who we were seeing, nurses, teachers, emailing us saying, I've had the worst day at work, but I've come in, I've put my feet up, and you've made me smile. And that kind of feedback is invaluable and means a lot, because then we sort of feel that's our job, to sort of just make people end the show just feeling like they've either learned something or been entertained, or just really felt that half hour was a good investment. It's been tricky for us as well, because over that whole period, what with press conferences popping up at unexpected times for Boris, and all sorts of other changes in the schedule, dramas of shorter durations, we've had quite erratic and inconsistent running times. So there were some days when genuinely we were told you could be 25 minutes, but we might need 45 minutes, and we'd be having to sort of really assemble that sort of range of content. And as we do that, and I mean, obviously we can go into some of the specific questions that I can see that you're starting to ask. Thank you. But as we think about what stories to do, we're really wanting to sort of think, okay, we want this to appeal to the broadest possible audience. We don't want it to feel niche, and we don't want it to feel too specialist. It might be that we can take people to places or introduce them to something that they've never been aware of before. And that is, I think, quite an important part of our remit in all sorts of ways. But equally, we don't want that to feel of limited appeal. So the way I always say it to people, and to the suppliers who are making films for us, would you imagine seeing a story that's on the One Show? Could you imagine seeing that in a newspaper? Could just be on the features pages of a newspaper. Doesn't have to be, it doesn't mean that I'm only after news, but does it feel topical enough to be in a newspaper? And more importantly than that, if you can, what sort of newspaper? Is that newspaper more tabloidy, or rather than too broadsheet? Because we're a populist show, and that means we don't want things that are just something that you might see in a sort of second section of one of the broadsheets. It has to really feel like it's relevant to modern Britain in all its shapes and sizes. And I think that's a particularly important thing, as well, as we kind of think, well, what is a modern TV audience? And over the years, I think when the One Show started, some of its content was to reflect some of the specialisms that were on BBC One, and that's great. We still do films that do venture into those territories, but I'm wanting them to have a more accessible and relatable sleeve, if you like.
Do keep your questions coming in via our Twitter account, the best way, at Broadcast Revo, via our Twitter account, at Broadcast Revo. You can also ask a question, #join the broadcast revolution. We'll be getting through those questions. We've got plenty of time with Rob. Very generous of you, because One Show's off the air, so you're on holiday at the moment, I think, actually.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing this bit. Average audience then, just how many people do you think, bums on seats, you're getting on a weekly basis, something like that?
I should have looked up the official average audience. I mean, it does. It's typically, if I say, it's usually anything between around sort of 3 to 3.5 million. Sometimes it might be a little bit less than that. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more. So,
and describe an average One Show viewer for me, if there is such a thing, because I always used to hate that when you'd get all research back to 5 Live and Radio 4 where I was, and it would say, well, the average age is 47 for 5 Live and 60 for you and yours. And you go, well, yeah, but there's, as you've just said, I can get loads of kids watching if we kind of get it a certain way. But is there a typical One Show viewer, do you think?
I'd like to think not, actually. And I think partly that's because, we also have that increasingly rare thing of being a show that families can sit and watch together. And that you can very much see that again from the messages that we're getting in, and you'll detect a trend here in the sense that we're really interested in seeing those instant reactions on social, and seeing what the reaction to the show is, and seeing which shows are trending and which shows aren't, you can often see people saying, I'm only watching this show because my parents wanted to, but I can't believe they've got Olivia Rodrigo on, or, something like that. You'll see various age groups sometimes a bit surprised at what we've had on, or reacting to something in a positive way. Very important to me, this sounds obvious, but very important to me that we menu quite clearly at the top of the show what's coming up, so that again, one of the ways I'll put it to my team sometimes is, my mum might not know that person or might not be interested in that film, but if we tell her that this item's coming up, she'll stay. Because I genuinely do think this is how people watch telly now. There'll be some people who, after the news, will watch the top of a show like The One Show, almost with their finger hovering over the remote. Is there anything on it today? And The One Show is one of those things. When you become a pillar of the schedule, it does mean that you're going to have some viewers who watch it loyally every day, and others who will check. I like this show, but I don't need to watch it every day. So is there something on it today that I want? And so, we've got to feel that everything's got, it sounds again silly in a way, but can we crunch everything down so that in a menu, it does feel like there's a real treat coming up? Because sometimes, an item may have topicality, but the topicality may just sometimes be, we've all had a tough day. Let's have a brilliant film about, an island with some incredible wildlife and just take us away. We were doing that quite a lot when people couldn't travel, that, being able to let them travel vicariously through a sort of film that took them, to see the wildlife on the Norfolk Broads, or took them to, see some baby puffins being born on a Scottish nature reserve or something. These kinds of things, that was a great escape for people. And that kind of escape, you'll have seen it with other programs on. There's a reason why channels like Channel 5 are running all of those series about various celebrities traveling around the UK. People like seeing places that they can't actually necessarily get to themselves.
I remember when the program first started, it could be almost a jarring array of subjects. And then people have got used to that sort of format. I mean, I remember, I think the last program before your summer break, there was Hugh Jackman starting off the program. Richard E. Grant kind of came second. And then there was something about garden sheds. And I just thought, this is unique. You don't see that blend that often. But then my sort of thinking with this was, loads of people are tuning in live for the news programs at the moment, and you're the program that's saying to people, stay live with us, don't start streaming Netflix, stick with us. And so that variety is so important for you.
It's crucial, and that comes back to what I was just saying, that it's variety, but it is rooted in a degree in some sort of topicality. So all of those. Now I accept that show that you mentioned. That was the last one before we went off on our summer break, and we had one more big name than perhaps we would normally have comfortably fitted in. But some of the people that come to us, we're just not going to say no to. So we were very lucky that day. It was Alex Jones's last show before she went on maternity leave. We were very lucky to have some really big names to sort of send her off. But that mix, they weren't just there for fun. Obviously, Hugh Jackman had a film coming out. Suanne Jones had a new drama that I think it has now been announced was going to start just before we came back on air. And The Shed was actually the sort of item that you guys may well have pitched to us, in the sense that it was about the shed of the year. So it was the results and the winner of the shed of the year. Now, I've had emails from some of the people on this call that would be in a similar vein. So, for example, we did the neighbour of the year, I think, last year with the co-op that came, through an email in a similar way. So, some important principles, I guess, to establish with those kinds of items. If you were emailing me saying, "Oh, we've got I'm trying to think of a brand, and now my mind's gone blank." But if you were coming up with an awards that was linked to a company, we may do that if we think that there is, interesting, if there's significance in the result in some way. The neighbour of the year, clearly there was. The shed of the year, there was. And that was vindicated in a way that the next day after that item, I heard the Radio 2 news bulletins talking about the shed of the year, which I found quite extraordinary in a way, because you couldn't see the shed in that way. But, we want to do those things as an exclusive. We want, and that is the key thing for us. We want to be the TV first. So all your instincts quite often will be, and I've seen it happen, and I've seen it happen sometimes. We've already agreed to do an item, and then I'll still get copied into the emails touting the same guest or the same thing around, because you'll be trying to get widespread, coverage. But it doesn't work for us if it's already been on other programs that day. Obviously we go out at 7. So there's been lots of other topical programs, starting with breakfast, the daytime ITV shows, our own daytime show, which we started on BBC One Morning Live as well. We need to make sure that we aren't just replicating what people have seen elsewhere. So it isn't just us being pernickety when we say, well, we have that exclusively. It's because viewers don't want to feel that on a show like The One Show, they're getting sort of the same as they've seen elsewhere. And it sounds awful for me to say it like this, but with our sort of viewing figures, and the sort of role we've got in the schedule, you shouldn't be bringing us stuff that you're trying to get over everything else as well. We need to really feel that we'll bring you more exposure. But the flip side of that is we need you to sort of stick to that exclusivity once that's been agreed. If there's some commercial references, it's interesting, because obviously lots of the things that you might bring to us have come to us because there's somebody who's wanting to get something coverage. Now, it isn't the case always that the BBC can't mention companies or commercial things. It's about whether or not there's an editorial significance to that, whether there's a justification for it, and if a company is sponsoring something, then there may well be a justification for mentioning it. It may well be that once we've discussed that with the relevant people at the BBC, the agreement is we only mention it once. But that still gives whatever that event is, whatever the product is, or whatever, exposure in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get elsewhere. We see this with artists that come on the One Show, with books that come on the One Show. You'll often get the tweet from somebody later saying, "Oh wow, we were this number in the best-selling books, and now we've shot up to this." Now, we don't do our items just to help people sell things. We're doing our items because we think that there's obviously something of interest to our viewers. But from your perspective, those viewers we bring may give that sort of greater awareness then to the thing that you're trying to get awareness of. So, it's the perfect show in that way for, both telling people about stuff that they should be aware of, but also that having a real advantage to whoever we've selected to put on. But we'll only put them on, as I say, if we think that, we won't do a product launch generally. We don't promote things in that way. So I get tons of emails from people saying, "Oh, our restaurant's just reopened and we've got this new menu." we're never going to do that unless they're the first company to be, I don't know, routinely just serving up insects or something, something that's really out of the ordinary. An event as well, if you do have to be realistic about the brand references. And I think if you're working for a client who, is really pushy about that, then it just may not come to anything. Also, it's worth remembering a lot of the emails we get may be they may appear to be about a celebrity who is really keen to talk about X, Y, and Z. I get a lot of emails about this. We're always quite wary of the ones where it looks like that celebrity is talking about that purely because the company has paid them to do that. They are the face of that. And if it doesn't have that ring of authenticity for us, then we won't want to do it. It's difficult to go into examples of that without sort of,
Well, let me give you. Well, let me give you a few examples, and they can come from the questions, because we've got stacks. They're coming through on our Twitter account at Broadcast Revo. There's loads, so feel free to be as brief as you want, and I'll try and get through as many as we have here. Let's start off with Hannah's. Can a pitch ever be too early? We like to plan ahead for big events. Is it better to have a long lead time for creating films? What's the sort of time frames we're talking about?
Absolutely, and we often do find that I would say a lot of the things people contact us about are too late. We are planning things a long way in advance, and obviously, although a lot of our content is topical, and mostly the studio stuff is topical, a lot of the films will have been commissioned or conceived quite a way in advance. So I'd say by all means send it as early as you can, because it then gives us ideas for different ways of doing it. Whereas if you approach us 2 days before something, then that really limits the number of ways we could approach it. We could only then do it probably in the live elements of the show. We may not have enough time because we may already have the guests all booked up. So we usually keep a sort of couple of minutes free for topical chat on things. But particularly at the moment, that might be if there's been a new development on a vaccine or something like that. It's unlikely that we'll do something lighter as that sort of topical chat. So by getting in early, it might be that we've thought, well, that isn't something we do in the studio, but we could do a really nice film on that. The Neighbour of the Year and The Shed of the Year are both really good examples of that, actually. And the thing that appealed to us about them, because again, that comes back to sort of just trying to nail what's the one show about. The Shed of the Year isn't really about the shed. Obviously in many ways it is, and you're wanting to have that kind of, what they done? What's the winning one? It's also just about the people who put time and effort and creativity into that. What sort of people are they? What inspired the idea? So all our stories really have to have some heart, and so if there's a big new scientific development or something, again, that may not appeal to me unless there's some sort of heart to it. Who's the person that conceived that? Were they working 24 hours a day to get it done? That might help us find a way into it. But it's really trying to make that sort of relatable and be about the people and the characters as much as the sort of thing that ostensibly the item is about.
So Kerry asks, what's the best way of pitching forward features to you, bearing in mind you like to keep things topical on the day? You've answered up to a point, but I suppose really how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, so we've got, a lot of you, I think, do already do this in any name that you've got on the team. You'll send them. All ideas ultimately will find their way back to me, but equally, and I read every email that I get and think about every idea that is suggested. I don't, I'm afraid, have time, unfortunately, anymore. I used to be one of those people who prided myself on replying to every email. I can't anymore. But what I would say is, if you are sending an idea, I will read it. You don't need to then send 5 more emails saying, did you see my email about this? Just following up on this. And I know sometimes that's just part of the way you do things, but it won't make me reply, because obviously that's just sort of clogging up the time I've got to think about the ideas, if you like. So if you can bear the fact that you won't always get an individual reply, happy for things to be sent to me or to any of the other contacts that you may have on the show.
Quite a few questions have focused on something that Ruth has raised here. How relevant is it to pitch experts to the producers for comments on current affairs topics, or do you do all your own sourcing for that sort of thing?
Look, we're always keen to hear about new experts, but yeah, we generally tend to, we'll tend to find our own, but obviously we only hear about new people through those kinds of unsolicited emails and approaches that you're talking about. So again, I wouldn't want to discourage people from sending them. What I'll do quite often, if I see something and there's some footage of somebody, I think, I'm not going to do that item, but they may be useful for something else. I will forward that to the key people on our various teams, and and say, let's bear this person in mind next time something comes up, around that. Experts in particular, I'd say, are very useful on the morning live show as opposed to the one show. And I've tried to have a bit of a distinction, if you like, between what the two shows are about. I think Morning Live very much is wanting to give people practical advice and tips and information, whereas the one show, I think, does have a bit more of a sense of it's the end of the day, kick your shoes off a little bit, and we'll give you a bit of a distraction and a treat.
Interesting question from Ian. What are the topics you won't cover on the one show?
It's ones that you couldn't imagine, if you couldn't imagine explaining to maybe a child in the family. So anything about sort of sex offenders and grooming is very difficult, has been done on the one show. I'm not sure that's the direction that I'd go with it. I don't really want to have difficult questions. At the opposite end of the spectrum, this will sound trivial, but maybe the sort of thing that you might pitch is people training to be Father Christmas is a very interesting and surprisingly controversial territory for us, because then you're instantly into the territory of families up in arms that you've spoilt the magic of Christmas by suggesting that Father Christmas isn't real. So there's all sorts of pitfalls, if you like, on even seemingly innocuous things. We will quite often do topics that are challenging if we can find the one show way into it. I don't want to, I think it is very important that part of being a show that is about modern Britain is that sometimes it's going to not upset but surprise or make think some of the viewers who perhaps have more with a small c, conservative views, and I think this was somebody who detected something we'd done with a few films last year put it very astutely. They said, you're hiding the vegetables, was the way they put it, which I really liked. There were some films, that we've done that I'd expected some people to say, this is outrageous. And yet what was quite striking was positive, feedback from certain viewers. I'll give you an example. This isn't in itself controversial, but we did a film last year when it would have been Pride and the events weren't happening, and we were going to have done something around Black Pride. So instead, we did a film about what it was like, for somebody who was Black and gay. and the sort of reactions that there'd been within their family and all of that. And what I found really heartening was, again, just getting a couple of emails that were sent to us from people saying, I'm white, I'm middle class, hadn't thought about any of that. Thanks for educating me, and I think, it sounds pompous if you start sort of talking about all the BBC values and all of that. But, shows like ours have a really important role to play in sort of making sure that we are, helping, people who perhaps wouldn't have thought of watching full programs on certain topics, that we can help, just give them sort of an introduction to things they may not have thought of. So, I wouldn't like to say that there are that many topics we could never do, but we've got to find our own way into them. We won't do it if we think it's boring or it's too full of information and doesn't have enough heart.
I think that answers Leslie's question, which is, what do you look for in a pitch? If I reframe that and say, describe to us one pitch, a recent one that's come through, you've seen it and you've gone, that's completely knockout, we're definitely doing it. What was the magic ingredient or set of ingredients?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm looking at dozens of things every day. So I think that the horrendous thing about that is that I forget each one, I don't forget straight away, but
they become a blur.
They do slightly blur into one. But, the perfect pitch for us has got a degree of topicality. Okay, let me think of a couple that were very good. So when cruise ships started returning around a few months ago, I think it was around the spring break holiday, and cruises were initially going around just the UK for a few days. But when we were approached with the exclusive access to go, and another program then managed to get sort of dockside access, I think, but we were the only people who were on the cruise as it went around the UK, and we actually then ran 2 films on that, because we did it with people about to board it, and then we did it as it docked. We did a very fast turnaround on what the cruise had been like. So that felt like it was topical, because it was sort of the world returning to normal a bit. It had exclusivity, it had access, but also it had the heart of people who'd been desperate to start traveling again, who, some of you will know, people who like cruises tend to be passionate about them. So, they felt they'd missed out. So, we were also then getting that topicality of how's it adapted? How's it going to work? What's the distancing? Similarly, we had the first TV access when the toppled statue of Colston in Bristol found its new home in a museum. We had the first TV access to the museum and the first reveal of it, in situ there. So, and that was a great item. And I think the thing to remember about that, if we're talking about exclusivity, and you might be worried about that, the great thing is sometimes if we go out at 7, then the press release could be embargoed to also go out, at 7 or 7:30 to coincide with what we run on the One Show. And then it could still make the next morning's papers, could still be on the daytime shows, all of that. So, I wouldn't want you to think, we've missed all that day's coverage or whatever. The way people consume news, as we know, and stories is so different, and is a sort of 24-hour operation. If you maybe think of the start of that cycle as being potentially, when we're on air, it does actually give you huge other bites of the cherry, for the next morning.
Let's look at a couple of sort of subjects in particular, or areas in particular. Emma asks, she's from Click Sergeant, how often do you cover charity fundraising stories or campaigns? What are you looking for in individual fundraising stories? It's always intriguing for the BBC because you've got children in need kind of running in the background as well. But obviously there's an appetite for more, I'd have thought.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And obviously we get, and it's heartbreaking really, dozens of really good causes, emailing us every day, heartbreaking stories. Can you feature this? We obviously, as you were suggesting, Mike, we tend to focus on the BBC the umbrella charities, if you like, that help lots of other causes. So we do a lot of support for children in need. We do a lot of support for comic relief. In between, for us to focus on something, there has to be something really unique. So a couple of good examples about that. You may remember there was the young boy who camped out for a year in a tent in his garden. You know, that was a story that had something unique about it. So we did that. We did some people who, some men who were climbing a lot of mountains. We did in Scotland. We did because there was a particular mental health angle to that story that lifted it above the normal. Because what we tend to find is we'll every day we'll get an email, this person's running around the coast of Britain, this person's doing this, and they're all really worthwhile causes. We'd love to support them, but why would we pick that one above another? Because obviously from a BBC perspective, a charity isn't dissimilar to a business. You know, we've got to make sure that there is a justification as to why we've picked that one above all the others that you know would be equally deserving. So again, it needs to have something that bit more. It might be, you know, it might be the first time something's been done. It might be the or it might be that somebody taking part that's particularly unusual. It might be the way they've been able to capture all the stuff. So we did a guy who'd walked around the coast of Britain last year, but for a charity. But the footage he'd got along the way was really amazing, and we were able to sort of, you know, cut that together into a lovely film. Equally,
you like a bit of footage like that, B-roll footage. You know, you love the
absolutely, because what we don't like is films that are just people looking back on something. You know, well, I've done, you know, because you might say, and you'll be able to get the end of this as they cross the finishing line. But unless we've seen all the rest of it, what's going to fill the 4.5 minutes if we're making a film on it? You know, that's the thing. You know, we don't just want to have people talking. We want to be able to sort of see the whole experience. So we had some people who rode across the Atlantic, you know, and what we were offered there was somebody saying, actually, you know, we'll be able to be there and capture the interview when they land in Barbados, because we were never going to obviously be able to do that. Our budgets would barely get us to, you know, Bournemouth. So the fact that they'd also been filming it all the way across the Atlantic, again, gave us, you know, the material to make that come to life.
A few more quickies. We'll try and rattle through them. We've got maybe 10 more minutes with you, if that's okay. Lauren at Kazoo, how do you cover food and drink on the One Show? Do you prefer new product launches or recipe content? Or is actually something maybe that's for earlier in the day and you wouldn't do food and drink on the One Show?
Well, it's. I think we would be looking more for trends with food and drink. So, you know, if there was something that, I got an email a few months ago, may have been from one of you guys, that was talking about, you know, the oyster, you know, a new way of doing oysters in Scotland or something. And we wouldn't do a film on just that one company, or it's unlikely we'd do a film on that one company. You know, nothing's impossible, depends, you know. But, you know, that might become an element of a broader story about the oyster industry in Scotland and why it's under threat. You know, if there's a topical news line, it might be we can weave things into it. So I'd encourage you there to think, you know, well, they're not going to do 4 minutes just talking about one product. But it might be that that's something that's representative of the new trend, and the access that you give us could be the jumping off point for that. We may, I mean, you know, we do focus on restaurants in all sorts of different ways with food and drink, you know, so where we did an item about the shortage of staff in hospitality industry a few weeks ago, which, you know, again, allowed us to go to restaurants that we knew, you know, were interesting in their own right, but maybe it had to shut at lunchtime or whatever because they hadn't got enough staff. So some of these things we kind of keep on a sort of mental shelf, if you like, till you know, it may not be that when the idea is first mooted we do it, but it may pop up again.
Carolyn, this is Yorkshire. Now, careful with this one. This could open the floodgates. Is there a particular topic or a particular guest that you'd really love to feature, and you haven't been able to do it yet for whatever reason?
That's a hard one because
you've done such a wide range.
Well, and we've been lucky enough to have an incredible range of guests. But I think, again, as we were saying before, just as no one person is famous to everybody, people's currency comes and goes as well. You know, there are certain people who at one point you might think, oh, they're not really very now. And then something will happen. They'll win one of the big TV talent shows. They'll just be in the news for some other reason. They may do some initiative that really captures public attention, and suddenly they're hot again. So, you know, I wouldn't want to rule anybody in or out.
Geographical spread, asks Beeline PR. I know that, you know, there are all sorts of offices supplying the one show, whether it's coming from Bristol or Salford or whatever. It's not just a London program, but how important is the geographical spread of your content in your editorial planning? And this is being asked from Scotland.
It's crucial. In fact, you know, and this is absolutely the case. I will rarely commission anything that's in London, because the bar for stories in London has to be so much higher than for anywhere else in the UK, because, you know, people are super served by London, you know, on their screens. All our suppliers for films are outside London. You know, we work with a number of indies dotted around the UK. That is absolutely crucial to us. You know, and so we'll always try and make sure, you know, every show is reflecting different parts, you know, of the country. It's fundamental, you know, to the one show. If you ever watch a show and it feels like it's a London show, then we've really failed and not done our job with that.
Georgina asks, do you like receiving research and data revealing new insight? You know, you can get reams of new research and stats and all sorts of things. What role does it play in a pitch to you?
I think in the first instance, you know, a shorter pitch giving us the top line and the headlines is better. And then if you've got all of that sort of information, then make clear you've got it, because, you know, we've all seen things that we read it and we think, really, I don't fully believe that. But so if we're interested, we'll come back for the further detail, I'd say.
In the Greta Thunberg sort of world, we've got massive climate focus coming up later this year in this country. Johnny from Electricity Northwest, how interested is the show in covering green issues like electric vehicles, move to net zero, and the impact on people in the long term? What sort of hook are you looking for with environmental green issues?
So that's a massive deal for us. We, you know, even within the last, you know, few months, we've had dozens of films and items that touch on that in different ways. You know, a very nice one, which again could have come from one of you guys. You know, if you think of it like this, we did a film about green hairdressers, starting from the perspective that, you know, actually hairdressers, broadly speaking, were as an industry one of the least environmentally friendly ones around. But there was this new collective of barbers and hairdressers that was doing it in a much more sustainable way, even recycling the hair, you know, and that was what hooked me. You know, it was very much, well, really, what do you do with the hair? You know, and that made a really interesting part of the film. We, you know, equally, we did a scheme earlier in the year about renting, you know, families who rent their Christmas tree every year rather than buy one. They rent the same one each year, and it goes back and then it comes back the next year. You know, so that had, again, heart as well. But, you know, at the heart of both of those stories, there were businesses, there were commercial activities, but we weaved the greater topicality around it. Over the next few months, we will be going really big on green stories and sustainability. I see it as our role as we approach, you know, the whole COP26 conference, to really make everyday viewers understand why this matters, why it isn't just sort of politicians talking about it, how we can all make a difference. So our stories will need to reflect the sort of the kind of things I've talked about, you know, hairdressers, Christmas trees, all of that, the everyday things in our own lives, rather than the big political sort of debates and discussions, but massively important to us.
Last couple for you, Joe at Sightsavers. What percentage of international stories does the One Show cover? Is it very much a domestic agenda?
Yes, it is. There may well be times when we, you know, sometimes there'll be stories that dominate the headlines, and I'll think, okay, how can we do this? A good example of that was when there was the, really dramatic and horrendous sort of rise of COVID cases in India, and we thought, okay, how are we going to do that? And we looked at what sort of communities in the UK were doing to support maybe communities or family members, overseas. Equally, we did do before my time, but we did some Australian, wildfires as well. We've got to find a British angle. I'd say we are a program that is about modern Britain.
Letitia from Wolfstar asks, what do you see as the future for the One Show? Do you think you'll always be broadcasting live? Do you think the rise of streaming is likely to impact this going forward?
Again, very good question. TV's changing in all sorts of ways. I think of us as a shop window in many ways for many of the other things the BBC has to offer. We obviously talk about things on other platforms and other channels, but I think we can help kind of direct people to some of the things that may be on a streaming service I think of us as curators in some ways, picking out the things that are worthy of people's attention. So, I'd like to think that we'll continue the way we are, but obviously to do that, we have to make sure we retain our relevance. Important for people to remember as well, though, that a lot of people watch programs like the One Show live on iPlayer rather than on a television. So we've started deliberately reffing that at the top of the show as well. We're live on BBC One and iPlayer, so that people just get into that habit of thinking of different ways of consuming their content.
Final question, and it's an intriguing one. It comes from Mark. And it talks about this time. I think the ultimate compliment for a program is if you're satirized or if you're spoofed. We had this problem on You and Yours. We were always being mentioned in Radio 4 comedies, and we thought, well, actually, it's not bad mention here. Mark says, did you see anything familiar in This Time with Alan Partridge? And did you actually take it as a compliment?
Well, look, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't watch it. But at the same time, I think that in some ways, when people make the link between that and the One Show, I think it relies on, or I'd like to think, relies on a slightly old-fashioned sense of what the program was. Some of you will know there was lots of coverage of this at the time. When they had, I think it was in 2017. They had Mel Brooks on the One Show, and he just said, this show is nuts. It's because it was, and it was.
Wasn't that great? One of the greatest comedy brains of all time, kind of savoring it and enjoying the roller coaster.
Yes and no. Because I've had people say, I love that the One Show is random. It's not, or if it is, again, we've not got it right, and I think, the key thing about that is, and one of the joys of the One Show has always been when you have that big name guest, engage with the film that they've just seen and chat about it for a little bit so that it's all joined up. It's only when you don't join it up, it feels random. It's, I sometimes genuinely, and again, this sounds a bit sort of pompous, but I look at some of the shows we've done where you think, God, in that 28 minutes, we've talked about this film, we've talked about this new initiative to rewild this species, we've talked about this breakthrough in medicine, we've talked about this vaccine, and we've also talked about this fun TV series starting tomorrow night. That range of stuff, some of it may seem trivial to some. Again, I like to think of it as what would, not everything you would consume online or in a newspaper is always going to be sort of super weighty. But at the same time as well, keeping people entertained as well as informed is just so key, at the moment. So it's always good to be talked about, and so that is flattering. But I would urge people to not assume that what they think the show is actually correct.
I think let's wrap up. It's not a question so much as a comment. It comes from Kerry. Not so much a question, more a statement. I loved the One Show during lockdown. I was locked down in Surrey with my 84-year-old mum following my dad dying from COVID. It was absolutely essential. It was our regular viewing schedule every night. Thank you. And I think that sums it up, doesn't it?
That's lovely, and I'm so sorry to hear about the experience you had. But that for me that's what we were trying to do for people who go through tough times, as we all do in different ways. If we can just make things feel a bit better for a while and give people a bit of an escape, whilst also telling them useful and interesting things, then we've done our job.